Welcome guys. So today we're going to cover a little bit of theory concepts and a few important practical concepts. To start with, I'm just going to cover you what is intelligence, right? How if sometimes the default methods are not available to you. For example, if I just type over here cy dot, right? I'm getting few methods that are available to me. If you're not getting this, right, due to any reason or your Cypress version is quite old, you can bring it back. Right, so that's one thing. Another thing is we're just going to cover on timeouts is a really important concept in Cypress. So timeouts doesn't so in Selenium we have implicit wait, right? It is applied to throughout your execution, but in Cypress it doesn't works that way. So every individual element, or I would say individual method, has its own timeouts that we're going to cover. Then another important topic is error recovery mechanism, guys. So what is the how do we use try catch in Cypress? Can we use it? If not, why and why it is not advisable to use. And then in while doing the session, we'll cover an important difference between Cypress and Sci command. One difference we already covered in previous video. Today I'm going to cover another one. So in order to bring the IntelliSense, what you need to do is, in case it is not available to you, click on the Cypress folder, add a new file and name it as jsconfig.json, right? So it got added at this level, guys. You just have to add it at the level of cypress.json. So that's how you can move it. And from Cypress official documentation, so this is the command that you have to include. Okay, so if you would see, if your reference types are not available, right, just add this command in jsconfig.json and Cypress will understand it, that you really don't need to worry about it, and just save it. So that should make it working. Now coming to the first topic is, let's just discuss the default timeouts. So guys, as I mentioned in my previous videos, cv.visit has a default time of 60,000 milliseconds, which is 60 seconds. cv.get has default timeout of 4000 milliseconds, which is 4 seconds. Can you change it? Yes, we did change it in previous videos. So in cypress.json, we added this command, default command timeout to 6000. So which means all my cv.get commands will follow this time. All right, but my other commands won't follow. Like there's nothing changed to cv.visit. So what are the default timeouts? If you would go to Cypress official documentation, I'm going to leave this link in the description or in comment section, guys. So my default command timeout, which is cv.get uses or cv.find uses, or all the most DOM based commands uses, is 4000 milliseconds. My exec timeout, so there is another command cv.exec. This we can use like while we are doing with the let's say you want to run a build right through npm, so you can just execute this command, like cv.exec. So it just basically executes a command, and from the with help of Cypress, right? Any external commands, like some if you want to interact with a database. So that's how it is. For that it is 60,000 milliseconds. And task timeout means cv.task, if you want to perform some task or if you want to wait for some task to finish, right? So that's when you use that, and by default it's again 60 seconds. And your most common and most important one, this visit, go, reload, right, which we're going to cover as we progress through the series, takes 60 seconds. So this we already covered. And your request timeout is basically when you're using API testing, right? Or when you're using, so we used cy.wait yesterday in one of our use cases. So if you do not provide any um, parameter within the wait method, it's going to wait for 5 seconds by default. Okay, then your response timeout, okay, cy.wait, fixtures, get cookies, set cookies, clear cookies. So all these commands use around 30,000, so it is 30 seconds. Sorry, so 30,000, yeah, around yeah, 30 seconds. So guys, this is how you need to understand that you have different timeouts for different methods that you invoke on Sci. Okay, you can always change that. Like I have changed my default timeout. I can change my page load timeout also in cypress.json. Press comma in double quotes, right, and then enter. Let's say rather than 60, I want to wait for 120,000 milliseconds. All right. So that is how you can change your default timeouts. But another thing is, what if like I just want to change, I don't want to change my default timeout at global level. You can also do at individual element level, right? For example, over here I can put a comma and I can mention my timeout, right? Timeout is to let's say 3000. So then it will just wait for, just for this element it will wait for 3000 seconds. Alright guys, I can also do it on this element, or let's say on my visit. I just want it to be timeout property to set it to rather than 60 seconds. For this particular URL I just want to make it 40 seconds. So that's how you can do it at element level if you really don't want to do it at global level, right? So these are guys different options that you have, okay, on timeouts. Now coming to the next is error recovery mechanism, a very important concept in Cypress. You cannot use try catch in Cypress, right? So by default and by nature of Cypress, they have given a really detailed article on their official documentation. You can just read, give it a read, but they don't encourage using try catch at element level, right? So there are two type of exceptions in Cypress or in any programming language. So there are caught exceptions and uncaught exceptions. The caught exceptions, which ones, which are related to, which are inbuilt in Cypress. So you can't really do anything about it, but there are uncaught exceptions. Now, what are uncaught exceptions? I'll just give you a practical demo. Now, let's say I want to visit this URL and I just make it as invalid URL. And I'm just going to go to my test runner. So my guys, test runner is already running, I hope. Oh, let me just run this now. So you have to use npx cypress open. Hope you're coming to this video after following my previous series in Cypress. Now just observe carefully over here. Observe the error message over here. So it has given me the error on visit itself. What is the error? The following error originated from your application code, not from Cypress. So they're saying like we have nothing to do with this error. This error is which is maybe like, since it is a malformed URL, it's not a correct URL. So it is an application error, right? Now that is something uncaught error, which even Cypress doesn't know, right? Like why this error comes. So that is why it has given us this, right? So now, can I just avoid it? Yes, you can avoid it. So how can I avoid it? There are a couple of ways, guys. You can avoid it at global level. You can also avoid every uncaught exception at, not avoid, maybe you can call it as catch as a better word, at local level also. So in order to catch these exceptions at global level, you have to go to support folder, open your index.js over here and type cypress dot on. So on is an event. So in Cypress we have events. Okay, so on is one of the event. So which we will be using, not much, but yeah, in some places we'll be using. So how it goes is on, as soon as you start typing, it will give you some suggestions. So this is my uncaught exception event. So we are saying that cypress.on. So it's quite self-explanatory and pretty nice English language, I would say. So on any uncaught exception, you can just say do not fail the test. So how would you say that? Your arrow function notation, just return false. So what I'm saying is, if you encounter any uncaught exception, return false, means do not fail the test. So Cypress says, okay, I don't need to really worry about it. So if I save it now, and I'm just go back to that. So if you see, the visit has, it has surpassed through visit command. It hasn't failed the test case over here, but it will fail at the next command because there's no element. So it has timed out after retrying after 6000 milliseconds. So this is the new timeout that we have set over here in cypress.json. So my default command timeout of get is 6000 now. Alright guys, so this is how you can catch the uncaught exceptions. Now what does it mean? One important point I would cover is where cypress.on, we also have cy.on. Okay? We can capture the event on cy as well. So this caps lock Cypress means, right, this whole Cypress word means it will apply at global level. I will fire this event at now spec level, right, which is again possible, guys. So you can fire that at a spec level, but it will apply to only that particular spec, right? Now, how we can prove that? Let's say I just leave it as it is and I delete this thing. I save it, I save my spec. Okay, where's my browser? Over here? Okay, so see, it really didn't apply. Okay, so it has failed at visit. Though I have this cy.on uncaught exception, but it really didn't work, right? Because Cypress hasn't given me an error message, but still it will accept it, but it won't work because there's nothing on over here. Just you are firing an event, it doesn't apply at global level. So that is really an important difference between Cypress and Cy, guys. Right? If you have to apply it at global level, you have to use Cypress. Right? It will pass though, but it's a wrong way of doing it. It won't actually be applied, right? And there won't be no compile. There won't be any compiler runtime error. Now it will pass the URL stuff and it will give you the same error message. Okay. Now I think I have already covered now. So if you want to apply at hook level, not at global level, right? If you really want to catch only this particular failure, so you apply over here. Okay, you return false only in this case, right? I still want to fail my test case for another for other uncaught exceptions. Okay, so that is how you can do it at hook level, or I would say locally. So Cy anyways works locally and Cypress works globally. Now next thing in this is, let me just change it to the right URL and save it. Okay. Next thing what we can also do is this also accepts a certain error message. Let's say I don't want to apply to all the error messages, all the uncaught error messages to be very precise. I just want to apply it only certain kind of error messages if it includes or if it contains. So what we can do is this, the second parameter method also accepts two another parameters. One is error and runnable. So runnable and is, guys, so there's also you can also catch the promises, right? Which is promises is a JavaScript concept. Right? So for that you need to watch the JavaScript videos. What are promises and how can you catch those? Right? For example, if I just have over here, and if I just use if, sorry, so it just gets confused between the languages. So if over here you just need to do error dot includes. Let me get the right. Yeah, I'll just copy this. If error dot message dot include, so that's the method, guys. And so if error dot message dot includes list not defined, which means if this error message contains this string or word, then also only then you return false. Right? Otherwise I want to pass. Right? So on these, guys, methods and all, so nobody crams these, right? So I haven't learned these messages by heart. So I always refer the documentation because there are a lot of languages and a lot of languages have lots of methods, right? So even you really need not cram these things. Okay, you need to understand the concepts, right? Once you understand the concept, okay, something is there, you will always figure out, you can refer the documentation and get those methods, right? It's really not a big deal. So now this will pass for everything else, but only for list not defined it will return false. Other things it will still halt the execution. So that was all uncaught exceptions and how you can handle locally your timeouts, your local timeouts, your global timeouts. Okay. Now in next video, guys, I'm just going to touch base on assertions, right, and the retrial mechanism, right, which is also very important concept. So that will be core concept video 3, and along with that we will also touch base on what is the default retrial mechanism of elements. So in Cypress you do not use like wait for element to be present, wait for element to be invisible. You don't have these commands at all. So that is the nature of Cypress. It provides you those commands, but how it provides you, that we will cover in next video, and probably I think that will be mostly the last video on core concepts, right? But I'll just look for it, and if there are any other important core concepts that we need to cover, I'll definitely cover those. So thank you, guys. I do like and subscribe. We'll catch in next video then.